Hello class, we're on chapter 3, lesson number 3. This chapter dealing with integers, we're going to now discuss addition. Now you might say, well, I already know how to add numbers. Well, with algebra, you have to understand that adding numbers is only part of it. You're going to be dealing with adding variables now. So we want to be able to show the, let's say the similarity that we would have between adding numbers and adding variables. And we're going to use some illustration, or at least this example here of particles and no particles. And when we're dealing with integers, we're dealing with positive and negative numbers. Okay, not just the counting numbers, so we don't necessarily just add 2 plus 2. In this case, we're going to see how we can add 2 plus negative 2. So we're reading in page 121, and we read in the year 1054, a very bright star appeared in the sky. The remnants of this star is known as the Crab Nebula, which is one of the strongest sources of radiation in our galaxy. Now, astronomers have speculated that this energy may result from the destruction of antimatter. Antimatter has been produced in the laboratory. When an antiparticle collides with an ordinary particle, they annihilate each other. Now, we read here of a figure. The figure below shows what happens when two protons come in contact with two antiprotons. So let's just take a look at this illustration, and they're just showing, well, two circles, okay, and two circles representing matter and two representing antimatter, but you'll notice that they actually color these in, and in coloring them in, you'll see the difference between the two, right? Okay. Now, the result is not 4 particles, but none. Now, when we put these two together, so this would annihilate this one, right? And this one would annihilate this one. So the result is no particles, meaning none exist. Now, let's look at the math side of this. Thinking of the number of protons as positive and the number of antiprotons as negative, the figure shows that positive 2 plus negative 2 is going to be equal to 0. The numbers plus 2 or positive 2 and negative 2 are called opposites of each other. If we represent a number by the letter x, then its opposite would be negative x. So we could write this now as x plus negative x, or the opposite, is also going to be equal to 0. If a positive number and a negative number are opposites of each other, their sum is 0. So you have a positive and a negative number, and they're opposites. We can take any number. We can take 3, positive 3, negative 3. 10, let's write these down so you can visualize these. These are opposites. Positive 3, negative 3. Positive 10, negative 10. Positive 50,000, negative 50,000. These are opposites. Oh, ran out a little room here. Okay. So, when we take the sum of them, the sum of these numbers is always going to be 0. Now, what about the sum of two numbers that are not opposites? Well, that's where things get a little bit different. They change. Considering what happens when different numbers of particles and antiparticles come into contact makes it obvious. Look at the examples below. So we have here the sum of negative 3 and negative 4. Well, if we were to take those as the illustration has, I'm going to draw one. I'm not going to be able to draw all of these, but let's just see. Well, I may be able to. Let's see. We have 1, 2, and 3. And then we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these are like the like the one we did up here, the antiparticle, right? So what happens when we add those together? Well, that would yield how many? Well, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the illustration is showing us antiparticles. Okay, but if we were to look at this as numbers, we would say that this is negative 3. Okay, we're adding these, and we would add negative 4. Well, what would that equal? Well, that would give us negative 7. As we can see, we have 7 antiparticles because they're of the same type, so we're increasing that type. And in this case, we're saying negative 3 and negative 4. They're both negative, so we're adding a negative onto a negative. Okay, so think of it that way. Let's take a look at example number 2. What is the sum of negative 2 and positive 5? So let's go ahead and look at the antiparticle of negative 2. So we have negative 2, and we're adding positive 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So negative 2 plus 5, and that would yield, well, let's just take a look. According to what we did up here where these annihilated each other, well, this negative would annihilate this negative, and this negative would annihilate this negative, and that leaves us with 3 circles, right? 1, 2, 3. So the answer to negative 2 plus 5 is positive 3. Erase that negative from your mind. So it's positive 3. The 2 antiparticles will annihilate the 2 of the 5 particles, leaving 3 in all. Let's take a look at the sum of 1 and negative 6. Well, we can just put that 1 as a positive, so we have 1. And we're going to add negative 6 is what they want. Now, it may sound strange because we're adding positives and negatives together, but try to really focus on the simple illustrations here that we're using in the simple example. So we have 6 negative. So again, these two would annihilate each other, again, according to that science that we were reading, and what that would leave behind are these, well, I'm sorry, I didn't really draw that line through as well. So it leaves these guys behind, right? So that would be 5 antiparticles. And in the math side, we would simply say 1 plus negative 6 would leave negative 5. Okay, and now you can use a number line. The number line could be helpful to you if you are going to move from one direction to another. The number line kind of gives you a point of reference, and you know positive moving in a positive direction and a negative direction. I would like to have you learn how to add and subtract less with the number line. It's almost like if you were counting with your fingers. When you were young and you first started counting, and then someone asked you what's 2 plus 2, so you would take 2 fingers and say, well, I have 2 fingers and I added 2 more, and that would be 4, and you would look at the total. So that's what we're doing with these positive and negative illustrations. We're showing you in a visual sense. A number line could be very helpful as well, and if we were to just to take the number line and put one up here and just draw it all the way out, and we would know that we could move in a direction either to the right or to the left, depending on whether we're going positive or negative, right? So let's go ahead and just put a simple line here. That would be 0, let's say, and then we know we have negative. Oh, we have positive 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5, 6, 7, 8. Running out of room. 9, and that's 10. Okay, and we could do the same thing in the negative direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that'll be negative 5, and then that's 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that's negative 10. Okay, so if we were to take the negative 3, we would start off -3. So we're always starting at 0, and we would go -3, and would say 1, 2, and 3. Right? So we're at -3, and we're going to add another -4 to it. So we would jump 1, 2, 3, 4. That will be another negative, and that puts us at -7, just as our answer. Okay, what if we were to take the other one? Well, we would have to go -2. There will be 1, 2 in the negative direction, but then we're told to add 5 in the positive direction, so we need to go the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And where does that place us? Place us right at the 3. Again, the same as our answer. Let's just do that last one. We had 1 plus -6, so we would have started over here from 0 to 1. That would have placed us at 1, but now we have to add -6, so we have to go back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that would put us at -5. So you can use a number line. It can be helpful. But again, whether you're drawing little circles and filling them in or using number lines, ultimately you need to start looking at what's going on here. And we're going to give you a better definition later on, maybe some rules. But even the rules are words. You should just start feeling more comfortable when you see positives and negatives. Again, start looking at -3 and -4. Well, I went from negative and I'm adding negative, so my number is definitely going to be negative, and I'm just simply adding the integers together. Okay? But now what happens over here when I have -2 and +5? Well, now I have to start looking at, well, which one's bigger? Well, the +5 is bigger, and I have a -2 here, so my answer should be positive. There's more positive than there's negative going on. The only question is, well, how do I add these two? Before, I actually had 3 and 4, and I added them because we were adding negative. But in this term, you're almost looking at this +5, right? And that you're reducing it over here by -2. Almost like you're subtracting, okay? But we don't want to rewrite our equations constantly by adding and subtracting. In fact, we want to be able to look at things from a positive and negative perspective and just sort of realize that we're either going up or down. Similar to like a bank account. When you go to a bank and you put money into a bank, you'll say you put $100 into the account. Okay, so let's go into the top corner over here. And they say, okay, you put $100 into the account, right? But then the next day you go out and you take out 20, so that's a -20. So you have a plus 100 and a -20. What would your balance be at the end of the day? Well, your balance here was 100. But what would your balance now be here? Well, you can say 100 minus 20, right? That would give you 80. But you can also think of it as two transactions, one being positive and one being negative. Let's say you go back and you take out another 30, okay, the next day. Well, you can certainly just subtract over here, but you can look at this as positive 80, negative 30. That would be 50, okay? Now let's say you go back in and you put in another positive 50 and you make another deposit. Okay, well, that would be 50 and 50. That's very simple. All right, but now if you start looking at the total here of these transactions, this is what accountants do. They look at all the positives and they look at all the negatives and they add them up, and they will eventually get to a total, the same total we would have had here, because we would have had 150 positive and we would have had 50 negative. Okay, let's just say -50, and of course positive 150 and -50 is going to be 100. So it can be viewed as a series of positive and negative movements. We went down here, we went down here, and then even though moving down, we went up. Why? Because there was a positive movement. So you don't necessarily have to look at adding and subtracting. You can add these up. I added these two together. I added these two together, and I actually added these two together. You might say, well, I took 150 minus 50. Yeah, you could look at it that way. But try to get used to seeing things in their positive and negative nature and being able to determine how you can join them together and come up with the right answer. when I'm looking at, and again, when I say join them, obviously we're adding, but are we adding a positive or are we adding a negative? Let's go back to our -3 plus -4. I am adding a negative plus a negative. My answer is going to be more negative. In this case, I had a little bit of negative, but I'm adding some positive. So I'm crossing out of the negative and into the positive. And again, the result is here. You're just going to have to feel as comfortable as you can. Really feel comfortable with these numbers. You need to look at whichever method helps you the most in the beginning until you feel more comfortable. And it's good that you do exercise. Now, we had one more example here, and it was, what is the sum of 15 plus -3? Now, look at what they do. And this is what we can do in our head. This will help you a little more. Let me just clear off my board here and better illustrate how you can look at positive and negative numbers. So I'm just going to leave that down there. Okay, so we have here positive 15. Let me get my white marker. And we have, okay, positive 15, and we have plus -23. Now, are we going to sit here and draw these circles all day long and try to figure out? No. But they're teaching us something here that we can look at -23 as really the sum of two negatives, okay? Before we were looking, remember we had -3 plus -4, right? And that was -7, okay? So what two numbers could I add to be -23? Well, I could say -20 and -3. That would be -23, right? Okay, I could take whatever numbers. I could say -13 and -10, right? That would be -23. Now, what would help me to solve this? Well, what we learned in the beginning is that when you had two numbers that were opposites, they cancel out and make it a 0. Well, that's what we're going to try to do here. How can we change this so that I can cancel out the positive here, and whatever I'm left over with will be my answer? So why don't we go ahead and write this as they show us as saying, well, 15 plus, now I'm going to put my parentheses, all right, which means that this is all going to be one value, and that value is going to be right here, the -23. Well, what two numbers could I add, as I was showing you over here, that would give me a 15 that I can now use to get rid of the positive 15? I need a -15, so it will be -15 plus, well, what would I add to 15? Well, that would be -8, all right? And we know 8 and 15 positive are 23, so it's just the opposite. -15 and -8 are -23. So now that I've done that, we know that we can, because we're doing the order of operations. When we have addition, and be very careful in math, when we have just a bunch of addition here, we're given a little bit more opportunity to remove those parentheses and move things around. And again, I say be careful. You're going to learn a few exceptions that you have to be careful with. You can always do it, but it depends on whether you're adding and subtracting. In this case, we're adding, okay? We're adding this over to here. So it's safe to do this. 15 plus -15 plus -8, right? And if we just put these together, and I can simplify this for you, and let's say, well, what if we had 6 minus 7? Okay, you might say, well, if I have 6 apples and I subtracted 7 apples, well, you really couldn't, because there wouldn't be a 7th apple to subtract. Well, if you have $6 and you subtracted $7, what would you have? Well, you'd have a debt. You'd have a debt of $1. This means a negative, okay? So we would have a negative number here. We're learning this with integers, and you may have learned it already, but we're really going to get deeper and deeper into this, because this is going to carry over throughout your entire math life, okay, into your next subjects of geometry and algebra 2 and beyond if you decide to study further. So we know that 6 minus 7 is equal to negative 1. Well, we also know that 6 plus 6 plus negative 7, I should have written this as 6 plus negative 7. So we could rewrite this as 6 plus negative 6 plus negative 1, right? And here we would have had that same opposites eliminating, leaving us with a negative 1. So all we're doing is taking this negative 7 and breaking it into two parts so that we can get rid of, in this case, the 6. And in this case over here, we're going to get rid of the 15. And that's going to give us negative 8. So positive 15 plus negative 23, or let's say positive 15 minus 23. We're going to be using these interchangeably. But let's just say for now, positive 15 plus negative 23. The negative is much bigger than the positive, which means that our result is going to be negative, okay? And hopefully you'll never have to learn that in your bank when you write a check for $50 and you only have 30 in your account because you didn't calculate. Well, that puts you into a negative 20, right? You had 30 in the bank and you wrote a check and you totally forgot about it and it came in at negative 50 and you're saying, whoa, I only have positive 30. That means they're going to tell you you have a balance of negative 20, okay? Which is not good because that balance is going to become much more negative when they give you a fee, okay? And let's say nowadays they give you a fee of $30, so it's another minus 30, and that means your bank account is going to be minus 50. So that's a little more applied math for the day-to-day use, but nonetheless, we need to feel comfortable with positives and negatives. I will leave you with something as simple as if I had I have a 100 and I added 100 negatives to this, right? Plus negative 1. Now, you don't think I'm going to write these all here, but just imagine that I put, okay, and I'm just going to put a dot, dot, dot all the way over here, though dot, dot, dot means to continue forever, but let's just say we're going to do this up to 100. That would be negative 100. Right? So positive 100 plus negative 100, which is the sum of all these negative ones. Well, if I had $100 in my pocket and every day you came and asked me for $1, I would be giving you $1. It's a positive for you, but it's a negative for me. Those negatives all add up to the day after 100 days I won't have any money. You come to me on the 101st day and say, can I have $1? And I'll tell you I don't have any left. Again, the bank will tell you the same if you use all of your dollars. So, well, that's the end of this this video. It seems simple as addition, but we're dealing with positives and negatives, and understand that when we're adding a negative to a positive, we're doing something different than we're used to. It's no longer counting the way we used to. We're not looking at the number of apples. We're not looking at things in a physical sense. We're now looking things in a little more abstract. Though we can certainly look at things in a physical sense, such as temperature, measurement of distance, and even time. So, okay, that's the end of this lesson.